Okay, welcome everyone to episode 6 of Runtime Reverie. Today, Craig is out of action, but Hot Take Pat is around, and we'll be talking about some interesting news and some interesting engineering and software-related topics. So let's see what's on the ticket this week. How you doing, Pat? All good?
Yeah, all good. Just been preparing for this conference talk, so going to America in less than a week. First time there.
What's the conference? Which conference are you going to?
It's ElixirConf USA. So it's like this programming language called Elixir. It's got like a really good community, and just the first time applying for this conference and got in. So that was pretty cool. And so now I have to live up to it.
Oh, fantastic! I think you actually got interviewed for that conference recently, right? About your topic. So we might
that's right.
We'll link it in the notes so people can go check out more about it. And you have to, when you reveal your thing, you have to tell us all about it. That'd be awesome. Okay, so in the news this week, I started telling you about it before, but Snowflake. Just for the audience, Snowflake is a sort of data warehouse and BI tool, very popular in enterprise. It's actually a fairly new business. It's only been around since 2012. We used it extensively in one of my recent roles. It's fantastic. It's a great tool. Super scalable, very, very powerful. And it's sort of come into the spotlight recently because of AI, right? Because what does AI depend on? Lots and lots of data. So that's interesting. They just released their earnings recently, and I thought that was interesting just because of what's happening in the market, right? So they have, let me get the numbers here, increased revenue to 674 million from 497 the prior quarter. So revenue's up. Their losses, however, are still significant. So they've got significant revenues, but they're losing money at the end of the day. And
is that from sales? They've got a large sales team, or how?
I haven't looked at the sort of details to see exactly where the spend's going. I'm sure you could look it up.
Because that's the thing, right? Like I don't know the full details, but the stories are here of like Atlassian was that they were sort of bootstrapped from the ground, and they, organically they didn't have a sales team, which is sort of surprising because the Atlassian products aren't my favorite. But so I was wondering if it feels like tech companies sort of choose one of two, sales first, sales led or product led.
Yeah, I mean the model, even into late last year, was very much focused on most businesses pushing to grow. So it was all about growth, not necessarily about profit, right? Like with profit was not that relevant. So you at all costs try and grow, try and get more users, more revenue in the door, even if that means you're spending more money, right? Even if that means you're losing money at the end of the day, right? So in this case, like just to give you an example, and I'll pull up the numbers now. So this last quarter, they had revenue of this is actually the April quarter, 623 million, but their net income was negative 225 million. Right? So they are likely just spending more to acquire that revenue. And then there was a very typical pattern. What I'm seeing, and I've seen this even local businesses. I spoke to a COO just a couple of days ago here in Melbourne, very similar pattern where up until fairly recently for them, they were just pushing for growth at all costs. Literally just, in their case, they're a scale up. They were just taking investor money and just using that to grow. So sales teams, new offices and new locations, growing into new locations and just trying to get more revenue in, and not worrying so much about cost, right? So they grew headcount dramatically to support that. And now, what's happened? Interest rates are up. Investors are wary. They want to see profitable businesses. They don't want to see money-losing businesses. and so everything's having to change around. And in the case of my friend's business, they've had to fire a lot of people. They reduced something like 2/3 of the headcount back to where they were many years ago, just to try and get closer to profitability. Right. Now, I don't see Snowflake doing that yet, but I just thought that was interesting because I've seen that broadly happen to many businesses. So, yeah.
Yeah. Do you think they have to get to a certain scale because of like what they have promised, or like if they just decide to go lean now, would they just people would be disappointed because it's like, oh, they're only like a $2 billion company, but we're expecting them to be a $20 billion company. Do you think that's the expectations are so high, or?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just looking at some of their public numbers here. So they've raised $2 billion, right? So they're public now, $2 billion. That's pretty significant. You have to go look at it, the sort of pattern of how they've raised that. So their IPO raised 600 mil. Prior to that, all the rest was prior to that. So I would think, like many businesses, not to single them out, they're not unique. They'll have a significant pressure to grow revenue because of all the investment put in to maintain maintain a certain valuation in the eyes of the market, right? And none of these very few of these businesses have gone through any sort of down round or significant adjustment yet. So yeah, it's interesting. I suspect that's probably what's happening in the public markets. And you can go look at their share price and see what's happening there, but none of that's happened to any of these private businesses yet. All these businesses, like my friend's business, on the books, they're still worth what they were worth a year ago when they were 300% bigger and had a different outlook. The other interesting thing that's happening that I hadn't thought about till recently is because most businesses are having to tighten their belt. What's the first thing they do when businesses tighten their belt? They cut some expenses, right?
Yep.
So when they cut expenses, that has a sort of ripple effect through all these other SaaS businesses because they all use each other's services. So then revenues tend to go down as well.
Because it's sort of like you will see like some new startup or whatever, and then you're like, oh, what are you using? And they're like using like a dozen or like 20 different things, and you're like, holy hell, like there's so much stuff here. They have to use, all this tooling. I mean, they don't have to, and you sort of do wonder, like, do they really need that one that costs $50 a month? So, yeah, that is it's sort of the survival of the fittest, right? Like you get to see which B2B SaaS companies are actually like valuable, and which ones are kind of just like, oh, that was nice to have, but it's not, no one actually wanted it that badly.
It's a larger scale version of what happens personally. An individual may have multiple subscriptions to many different things.
Like the streaming services, like
5 different video streaming things.
Yeah, like which one is Netflix on top, or is Netflix you sort of a bit sick of it and you can't get rid of it?
Yeah, and it matters even more in a business when you really should be tracking these things, tracking why you're using it, how much money you're spending on it, and justifying these things. Otherwise, they all add up. It's death by 1,000 cuts over and over and over. So interesting stuff. If you're a small growing business, be aware of your costs, right? So that's it. And the costs aren't just people, it's also tooling and other services. The bottom line matters. Awesome. What should we talk about next?
Yeah, we've got a few ideas in here. I was wanting to ask you about onboarding, or URL state was always an interesting one.
Remind me about the URL state one. Where'd that come from?
So this often comes up in like consulting, when I'm consulting with clients, and they'll have some sort of states, like some sort of single page app, and they will might have an extra ticket to go, oh, let's, we've done, it's a search screen. You search for products that are red, and then they want to add that thing to the URL, question mark, color equals red or whatever. And so it's just like additional thing. And then now you're like syncing, you've got two bits of state that you're syncing, like the URL, and then you've got like your internal state in like the component, and you're like trying to sync these two things. And then it also gets into a question of how like you designed your routing to begin with. So they might not have thought too much about their routes. But yeah, there's sort of two aspects to it: a user experience side, and then like a simplifying code side. So the simplifying the UX side is like kind of like on the web, like URLs are just there. Like you can't have a website without a URL, and you can't really have different pages, distinct pages, without having distinct URLs. So like the user can copy the URL, and like they could share that with someone. And if you copy the URL, your friend loads it. Like if you're doing like research for travel, or hey, places to see in like Korea or something like that, it'd be nice if you could share that with someone. And places that products that haven't really thought about that, your friend will receive that URL, and they won't see the same thing, because they're just sort of it's been an afterthought. The URL has sort of been forgotten.
Yeah, that's right. So if I could sort of rephrase it, the problem is people are conditioned to think that the browser, when they look at something, the address bar represents what they're looking at, because that's typically how HTML and websites and the whole web thing worked, right? You put in an address and you see the thing at that address. Then along came single page apps and client-heavy JavaScript apps where you saw lots of things change on the client. And in some cases, the link back to the address is missed. You end up storing state in some local storage or some other way, and store it in the session or something, and then you miss that. I think that expectation from users still exists. Look at most common services, YouTube, Google Meet, whatever you use, you can usually grab the address bar and send it to someone, and it is the thing you're looking at, or the app you're in. And I have seen it missed in many other single page apps, especially inside businesses where it's often just neglected. Maybe it's not seen as terribly important, so the business may skip.
Yeah, exactly. Not to sort of attack React or whatever, but often that's what I often worked on, and you'd sort of see like the entry point, like the routing would be done for the sort of like top level, but then you go inside and then there's like a modal, or there's like different sections or different states, and so they've like used state or something like that, and then so like it's sort of like the route goes in, but then it sort of stops there, and then everything else is sort of just like done internally with these hooks, because it's partly because it's just easier. It's just use state. I'm thinking, this is some state, so use state, and then to have it connect to the URL is like extra work, so it feels harder, and it feels sort of less natural, because the URL sort of feels a bit slow as well. Like changing the URL doesn't feel like the sort of dynamic thing that you can just sort of do every second. So yeah, in terms of like solutions, what I often advocate for, which I think it depends on the team you're with and designer, but like when you're at that mock-up stage with Figma, like try and map all the URLs like ahead of time, and get the designer to think about what the URL is, because it is part of the user experience. Like, hey, user story, I can share this link with another friend. Like that's a really valid user story. Or even I can right click on this thing and open it in a new tab. Like that's really useful. And if you probably, if you've seen like some single page apps, you right click, open a new tab, and it like takes you to like the default page. And you're like, oh, they just haven't hooked that stuff up properly. So yeah, that's like user experience point of view, and
that's a great idea.
Technical point of view.
Get design involved as well. Get them to think about that up front. It's actually, I know you and I worked on a project like that used that. I've borrowed that technique and I've used it ever since as well. It's not a lot of extra work to keep that in sync. To put some of that state in the in the address bar. It really isn't a lot of extra work. And then, even for your internal app, and it's just so much value, right?
Yeah, I find it because I was used to be more front end was like my role, and the front end's interesting because it's often the integration between like the design and the back ends, like these sort of two things sort of not all the time, but sometimes sort of get built together, and then your job is to like to glue them together. And so you sort of see these things that have been like just haven't been thought about, or just haven't been planned ahead in advance. And it sort of reminds me of like hearing stories about builders, like this architect comes up with this like grand plan, but then the builder actually has to work out like how the bits of timber and, hey, this bit of timber is going to go all the way through here or whatever, don't know much about building, but it's sort of just like left up to them. And so they're actually making pretty key decisions. And so, yeah, often what I do in my role is just like try and like prompt, get these people to sort of step up a little bit more and just try to tease out a bit more from their roles and go, okay, design, like this is your problem as well. Let's work on the URLs and stuff. Or, hey, backend team, you also have to sort of consider everything. You can't sort of be in your own little world down there. So
do you actually consider the URL, like literally the URL contents, to be part of the design and UX of the application?
Absolutely. Yeah, because the whole thing with the web as well is that these URLs should ideally still work. So you don't share a link with a friend on WhatsApp, and then the site gets a redesign, and then those links are 404s. Like links should be, there's some old document I think links should always work or something. I've forgotten how it goes, but like links should be permanent. Like and like all that sort of redirect stuff where you do like, okay, it's no longer /about, it's /team, and we need to redirect it. Like that's part of the user experience as well. And so it's not just like this like ticket where someone's like, given this drudgery job of like set up the redirects. And it's like no one cares. Like it's actually critical, like user experience thing, I think, because you might not have analytics on your 404 pages, or you just might sort of go, oh yeah, that's not a big problem.
Yeah, amazing, great. I'm thinking of a good way. Maybe we can even share some examples of how to do that with.
That's a good idea.
Such a good pattern. It's a fantastic pattern, and we can even show people how to do that in React, and maybe share some templates or some code.
Yeah, that's I think that there's patterns you can do in React and Angular, and it's often just basically the solution is just to make the URL the state, the source of state. And so it feels a bit weird because you're sort of cutting out that use state layer. But it means you don't have the syncing problem. You just sort of say like, the URL is the state, and then everything just gets derived from that. And then if I want to change the state, I have to change the URL. And like that feedback loop happens. So it sort of feels like, oh, that's going to be slower, or I'm missing something here. But it's actually, I think it's just sort of better.
Amazing. Awesome. So let's wrap it up. Great episode. If there's anyone listening out there and you have any feedback for us, please let us know. Feel free to DM us on Twitter, and even just say you're listening. This is it's been fun to make, and we're going to keep doing it. So I'm looking forward to next week.
Just quickly, did you have any picks this week? Anything that caught your eye?
Any picks?
Yeah.
What do you mean in terms of news? Or
no, like any products or anything that you sort of
any products or things I'm playing with? Well, I'm playing around with Loom right now. I don't know if I think Loom's a very popular one. It's not terribly new. Have I seen anything new I'm playing with? No, not particularly. Did you have any?
A couple. There's Dash, which is Mac only, sadly, but it's a documentation app that's really good. Just like basically like any programming language or library, it will index all the docs, and so you can just search for them and just go, oh, what's this web API or whatever, and you can just quickly search for it, and it's really, really well done. So that just had a new version. Interestingly, they've changed to a subscription model, but it's not. I don't think it's going to break the bank. It's like $20 a year or something. Yeah. So yeah, I think I'll make that my pick, and then at least some for next week.
I'll throw one in that I've been playing with, and I haven't used it extensively, but I'm trying to get a bit better at SEO and sort of title, picking good titles and wording and whatnot. There's one I ran into called keywordtool.io.
Oh, cool.
And it sort of builds on Google autocomplete and helps you sort of figure out what a good set of keywords to use in your article or your content might be. So instead of randomly asking ChatGPT to come up with a title, you can be a bit more specific about what to use.
Yeah, that's sort of interesting because I did a little stint at an SEO place. Like it seemed to me the art of it was to try and like naturally like weave those keywords in. Like you don't just sort of shove them in, or just like there has to be like look authentically like part of the what someone would search for is like what you're actually talking about. So it's sort of like there's a real art to it, which I find interesting.
Interesting. Awesome.
All right, cool.
Great one. I'll catch you next week.
Cool.
And we need to get some outro music. We should do that.
Oh, yeah. Good idea. Cool. See ya.